Zdraveti, everyone. That means hello in Bulgarian. I just want to say thank you so much for being here and giving us your time today. I am Emily, and I'm working alongside Abby and Parker, who are here with me. Ignore that, I'm a little nervous. And today we're going to be talking to you about our Capstone project that took place in Bulgaria this past summer. And so looking at this agenda, we're going to have a lot of things that we're going to go over today with you all. And so we're going to be starting with the background to Bulgaria. Then we'll have a background of the Bulgarian Biodiversity Foundation. This is then going to lead into the Burgas Black Sea context, which has a nice segue into our project introductions, where we'll go into more detail of our seagrass and greater Flamingo research. And then we're going to dive into the social ecological system of Burgas specifically. And then we'll have our conclusions and future recommendations for both projects. And we'll go over our deliverables. And then we'll end on a nice note with our individual reflections, as well as our cultural experiences. And at the end of our presentation, we're going to have about a 15-minute Q&A session.
So Bulgaria, you might know where Bulgaria is. Great, yeah, I didn't know where it was until I looked at a map. Bulgaria is located on the eastern side of Eastern Europe, and basically is on the western side of the Black Sea. They have one of the largest coastlines of the Black Sea available, located on the northwest shelf, which is a shelf that runs a couple miles out in the Black Sea, and so it's shallower water. Bulgaria was ruled by many people over time. The Byzantines, the Romans, the Ottomans, and the Russians all had influence in there at some point in some capacity. They've been monarchies, they've been dictatorships, and most recently, after World War II, they were behind the Berlin Wall, and they were not Soviet, nor they were part of the USSR, but Bulgaria did participate in communism, and up until the Berlin Wall fell, they were socialist, basically. Now Bulgaria is a republic, it's capitalist, but in talking with a lot of folks there, they would say that there is still a lot of holdover from socialism that still happens today. And that influences conservation, influences daily life. But most folks who are in our age bracket, those who are younger, really lean into the whole Western idea, and the country is turning around. And like there's still good work being done in Bulgaria across the board. Next slide, please.
Oh, me. And so the Bulgarian Biodiversity Foundation was founded in 1997, and it aims to conserve the biodiversity in Bulgaria. They emphasize the importance of participation from not only its citizens, but local communities as well, with the management of their protected areas, as well as their natural resources. And their mission statement states, BBF brings together people with different perceptions for the preservation of Bulgarian nature. Underlying everything we do is a belief that natural resource preservation is only possible through public awareness. We strive to increase recognition of the opportunities and benefits of protected areas and work for their long-term protection. There are 2 office locations in Bulgaria, one being the capital in Sofia and one along the sea in Burgas, which is where we were located. We worked alongside 4 amazing team members, which are Diana, the program director, Radistina, the communications expert, Spas, the conservation officer, and Gloria, the landscape planner. And just some examples of some projects that they've done. The first is the Salt of Life, and this was a past project that's been completed. And this focused on creating new breeding sites within the Atanosko Lake. And then the Lagoon of Life is a current project that we're going to talk to you about soon. And then another project that the Sofia location is working on currently is Game On. And this focuses on the public awareness of the problems of and solutions to climate change.
So Burgas in the Black Sea. Burgas is located within Burgas Bay, which used to be a main fishing port for Bulgaria. It's still the top processor for fish and fish catching for Bulgaria. but it is no longer the largest port in the region. That being said, it's surrounded by 5 major lakes. As you can see here on the map, they range in size and salinity, some going to being almost fresh to being very, very brackish, but there is no fully saltwater lakes. They're mainly brackish waters. They also range in what lives there and what they're used for. Some of the lakes are protected, some lakes are not. Some of the lakes, like the one we worked here in, which is called Athosco, runs the length here. Part of it is used for salt production, which is still being done in Burgas. And it was a main hub for salt production. Kind of what got Burgas on the map was producing this Black Sea salt. It's all done by hand, and so it's a very time-consuming process. And the business model had to go then in decline because getting salt from there to the table is difficult, especially being part of the EU. It's located on the Via Ponska migration route, which is a main migration route for bird species. Over 400 of them travel between Eastern Europe, down through Bulgaria, through the Middle East and into Africa every year. So Burgas sees thousands of birds come through every fall and spring. Some protected, some not protected, some reside there, some do not, depending on the species. So it's popular for birding and beach tourism. It's similar to how the US goes down to Mexico. They have cheap hotels and cheap beer, and they go down there, they have a good time. A big tourism place, people can go to the beach and then go home. It's a very similar idea from talking to locals, like people come, hang out, and then go home. The Black Sea is also, like everything, has climate change problems. The Black Sea is actually in 2 layers. The bottom layer is fully anoxic, no oxygen at all. So great for preserving Federation ships and pottery. It's stuff that gets sunk to the bottom of the sea. So a lot of treasure hunting happens. But the top layer is oxic, and therefore, stuff can live within that top layer. But as the Black Sea warms up, those layers are mixing more. And as they warm up, less oxygen can be held within the water column. And so the literal layer of life is shrinking very slowly. Fish are all moving north towards Russia because of cooler water. So Turkey's having a problem with fishing. So it is a big issue for conservation, especially in the majority of the Black Sea. And Burgas being on the Burgas shelf, or sorry, the Northwest Shelf, has more to deal with that because the water's already a bit shallower.
Now for our project introduction. So through the partnership with CLTL and Isla, which is an international education abroad organization, we were connected to BBF based on our personal interests, and therefore we were able to embark on our 3-month internship that was located in Burgas, Bulgaria. The overarching name of the project that we worked under is the Lagoon of Life. And this focuses on the complex conservation issues pertaining specifically to habitat restoration as well as coastal wetland management. And that kind of segued into our research topics, which focus specifically on seagrasses, Rupia maritima, and greater flamingos. And these 2 research topics were chosen specifically by BBF because they are important issues that currently need to be addressed and investigated in a deeper level that may not have been done before. And so now when trying to think of deliverables over the summer while we were there, we thought of what would not only be useful to us, but for BBF as well. We ended up creating 2 separate technical reports, 2 scientific posters, and a story map, all of which will be discussed in our deliverables section. So when I got there, I was told to seagrasses, and I thought, why plant seagrasses? Turns out they're actually pretty cool. And I will tell you, getting there and working with Stas, he was so excited about it that he just kind of contagious almost. Seagrasses are some of the most effective plants on the entire planet. They make up about 1% of the entire plant life in our oceans and seas, but are responsible for about 12% of carbon storage stored within ocean soils. So they're very important for carbon sequestration. And a lot of our work is actually done trying to research carbon sequestration and how that can impact and help the area around Burgas. They can sequester about 4 times the amount of carbon than that of land plants in comparison. They are responsible for nutrient cycling. They regulate water chemistry. They stabilize coastal environments. They provide food and habitat for across species of birds, which in our case is very important for being a big migration area. Those birds eat macroinvertebrates and also plants.
And so that's a big reason to create habitat in this area. And BBS has been doing this for a while. SPOS first identified River Maritima for our project, and it's been really successful so far. So River Maritima, commonly known as woodland grass, it's found across North America and Europe, mainly in freshwater streams, lochs, and lakes. Even though it is a seagrass, it really is a salt-tolerant freshwater species. So it is not a true seagrass in the sense of like it is not like kelp. This is a freshwater salt-tolerant species, which is great for where it is because these basins within Atanasosco Lake are so variant in salinity. These seagrass have a very large parameters for growth. So the salinity can range in 10 and 36%, which is great because with salt production, they control the water flow and the salinity that comes in and out. And so those plants need to be able to weather that large window of not only depth, but also range and salinity. And they also provide a huge source of dissolved oxygen for the Black Sea and carbon storage as well. Next slide, please. So our objectives. We want to evaluate small-scale transplantation efforts. So this is what happens whenever we transplant. It is SPOS going out, possibly by himself, he had us for 3 months, which is great, and doing this by himself. And so this is a very much small scale. And so it's trying to evaluate what works best and what's the best bang for your buck. They do use volunteers, but it's not always an option in the summertime. And they also want to develop and test a water improvement scheme, because if we're going to be transplanting all these seagrasses, why are we doing it besides habitat? And how do we know if it's working besides just visually looking at it? So they've been doing production of water sampling for a long time. The hope is to see long-term that the water quality is getting better, mainly with dissolved oxygen and nitrogen and carbon storage in these areas that we've replanted in River Maritima. And then obviously creating a habitat for bird species and other macroinvertebrates and other aquatic species like fish that live in these basins. But mostly it is bird species and small macroinvertebrates like brine shrimp. So to achieve these objectives, we transplanted a lot of seagrass and also collects water data. So we transplanted in mainly 2 ways: a sod method, which is the way you would take grass to your house. You pick it up and move it, and you keep it within the substrate. This is great because it doesn't do any damage to the plant itself that's within this block of soil, but you can transplant less grass overall. So the thought was, if we don't pull it out, maybe when we're traumatizing, we grow faster and therefore spread out faster. The other method we used was a turf method. A lot of these methods too are brought over from other French and Italian research on other seagrasses. So turf stands for transferring eelgrass remotely using frames. So they would use plastic frames. We use biodegradable wooden frames. And we basically would harvest the seagrass from a really densely populated basin, bundle it up and put it within these sort of sections, and then plant the entire frame into the substrate and then let it dissolve. About a year or so, the frame is fully gone, being made of wood, and also due to the high salinity, which is nice. This method is great because you get more plants, and so ideally more will survive, but it's very time intensive. We got maybe 3 frames done within 4 hours. So it takes a very, very long time to not only harvest, but also prep and then plant them all. For success indicators, new vegetative growth and bud growth is very important. So you guys, River Maritima can grow one of 2 ways: through rhizome growth, so you can just shoot out an arm and start growing, via clone, or they can produce sexually by bearing fruit with drupelets, which would be like a raspberry sort of deal. If that's a good image in your head. So when we're seeing new vegetative and bud growth, we know that it worked. If we see them bearing fruit, it really worked. And then long-term change in water chemistry is what we're really looking for to stabilize these basins. So in conclusion, these are terrible photos, but they do show that it did work. So we planted these frames here, and you can see growth around them. So it means that these plants are actually dropping seed and letting it go, and it's finding holes in other parts of the basins. SPOS uses a drone, and then he just flyovers and captures it. He'll pull images off those videos and then document the spatial data that way, which is great. And so we have seen success as far as the planting efforts go. So we're creating habitat. long term, though, we'll have to see how the water temperature changes in these basins.
All right, so our next project centered on Greater Flamingo. So near the end of 2019, Greater Flamingo started settling at Atonosovsko Lake, and ever since they've seen a rapid growth in their population size. Before this happened, they would still occasionally be seen around the lake, but it would typically be like a few individuals or a small group, but nothing large or consistent. But by the end of 2019, the total number of population counts across the entire year was around 1,400 individuals. And in 2021, that number increased to around 12,000 individuals. But that's not, of course, to say that there's 12,000 flamingos at the lake at like a single point in time, because they would completely overrun the lake if that were the case. But rather, that's the total number of counts that were taken of their population size every month throughout that entire year. But on average, in 2019, like on an average month, usually there'd be around 200 individuals. And in 2021, there'd be around, on average, 1,000 individuals. So still a pretty big difference in a 2-year span. The highest recorded number of individuals was actually just this past June, and it was 2,000 flamingos that were there all at one time. So that was the last month we actually have data for, because that's when we started our project. But considering the fact that they're already at an all-time high, we're likely going to see even higher numbers at the end of this year. So they're still growing in size as the years go on. So as this is such like a new situation in Burgas, little's known as to the cause and effects of such a large population of flamingos. So it's really led to 2 big questions. The first being, why have they all of a sudden started utilizing this area and in increasing numbers? And what impacts are they having on the other species that are common to the lake or utilize the lake? And this is especially important in this region, just because of how vital the lake is to the migratory birds, as Parker discussed earlier. So it's really important that we try to get down to the bottom of it before further impacts can happen. So this is where we and BBF come in. In order to kind of begin this process of finding answers to those questions, we started with the specific question, is there potential for interspecific competition between Greater Flamingo, pied avocets, and black-beam stilts? And these 2 other species were chosen both because they're common to the lake, but also because they've been observed to have had a decline in their population size ever since the establishment of the flamingo colony. So it's not really sure yet if it's as a result of the flamingos or if it's other external factors like climate change that's causing their decline. And you can see pictures of them over here on the right. The top one, of course, is flamingos. The middle one is a pied avocet, and the bottom one is a black-beam stilt. So to begin addressing our question, we implemented 2 actions. The first being a literary analysis, collecting and analyzing previous and current research on the Mediterranean Greater Flamingo metapopulation. And the second one being a geospatial analysis of the distribution of the 3 species at Atonosovsko Lake. So with the literary analysis, even though data and ecological systems are specific to the region they're conducted in or observed in, it can still help provide inferences into what we're seeing at Atonosovsko Lake. And our research ranged from different aspects like migratory behavior, diet, and foraging behavior, and current conservation problems that flamingos are currently facing. So our geospatial analysis, we received data from the Bulgarian Society for the Protection of Birds, another organization that's really big on bird conservation and has very close ties to BBF. And they collected data through monthly bird monitoring activities where they go around. They would record both the number of individuals they saw, but also the location in the lake in which they saw them. So we use that information to evaluate the distribution of the birds in order to try to determine which basin has the highest counts for each species. So basically, which basin is likely to be the most preferred for each of the species. So you can see our results on the screen. The 3 images to the left show the entirety of the map with density heat maps of the species. We did it based on high counts of individuals. So basically, if there's an occurrence where they saw over 100 individuals, we used that data to compare. So if you look in the middle, that map is for the stilts. And as little as there is, it doesn't appear to really share a lot of the same regions as the flamingos. If it does, it's in regions where there's not a lot of flamingos in those basins. So they're not really competing for space, and that could indicate that there's not interspecific or strong interspecific competition going on between those 2 species. But on the other hand, the avocets on the very left do have a pretty similar distribution with the greater flamingos. And not only that, but the basin that we determined to be their highest count basin is also shared with flamingos for their highest count basin. So you can see a zoomed in picture of the lake on the right of those basins. So for flamingos, they actually had 2 basins that tied as their highest, which are the 2 up there that are enclosed in the black lines. And the pink circles are the flamingos. The orange ones are avocets. So for both of them, the lighter colors are occurrences where they saw between 100 to 1,000 individuals, and the darker circles are the ones where they saw over 1,000 individuals at one time. And even though they're both sharing this basin in high quantities, they appear to be occupying different topographical regions of that basin, with the avocets in the shallower areas, kind of more towards the shore, and the flamingos kind of more further into the lake that's likely deeper. So what could this all mean? In terms of our literary analysis, we predict that the cause of the flamingos is largely tied to, of course, climate change. A lot of the studies talked about how one of the biggest conservation problems they're faced with right now is an increase in drought years, because this can cause overwintering or breeding or stock oversize to dry up, which then affects their normal migratory behaviors because they can't always go where they used to go. So this can cause them to try to find new regions, and Atonososka Lake is especially ideal for them because of the large expanse of salt pans that cover the lake. And like Parker said, they can control the water levels. So there's a lot more consistency with the water levels year round. So they wouldn't have to worry about it drying up on them. Also with our literary review on the diet of the avocets and greater flamingo, it indicates that there's enough of a difference that avocets should have other food sources, even with the high number of flamingos, even though both of them eat a high quantity of aquatic invertebrates. A big part of the flamingo's diet is the brine shrimp, which there's a lot of in the lake. And for avocets, it has been found that they can eat small fish. In some areas, it's a big part of their diet. So they likely have other food sources they have access to. So because of the difference in their diet and in the distribution within their shared basin, we predict that there's not interspecific or strong interspecific competition between the 2 species. But of course, more research is needed to have stronger conclusions. But all in all, our project with it helped to create preliminary understanding of the flamingos specific to this region that future studies and projects can build upon.
So now we're going to talk about the social ecosystems of Burgas. First, we'll talk about our feedback loops. So there's one here on the screen is a positive feedback loop. So whenever we transplant Maritima into a new basin, the chances of duration and disease will go way up. Increase in population of that transplanted area, increase in carbon sequestration, improved regulation of pH and salinity and overall water chemistry, and therefore chances of more growing also go up. The other feedback loop is a negative one that also involves River Maritima and salt production. So salt production does not happen in the same basin every year. It is smaller than it used to be, and the basins that were created for salt production originally. But there's not the same. They rotate basins every year because salt takes a long time to be produced. And so part of that feedback loop entails BBF identifies a new basin to transplant into. Salt production moves basins. Well, that population grows. It goes through this whole cycle, and that's great, and it depends on producing more. Salt production then moves basins to a basin with River Maritima in it, killing off the River Maritima, so then it gets too high, salt is produced, and the plants die off. BBF then identifies a new basin to transplant into, and so it goes all the way over again. So you're sort of chasing this ideal world, and so identifying basins that that won't be used is key for BBF to be able to have sustainable growth happen over long periods of time. The last feedback loop again revolves around global warming and is not very positive. So as the warming happens, salinity and temperature go up. So if the parameters for Maritima are then put under pressure for growth, and as warming goes up, less dissolved oxygen happens, therefore less carbon storage happens, therefore more nitrogen happens in the water, and so less growth can occur overall. So a very negative feedback loop that happens. For thresholds, because of the new influx of flamingos, we know that they probably don't compete with other bird species, but they are very, very hard on the substrate that they walk on. They tend to tear up and they'll walk over and basically destroy plant life in a lot of areas, especially in large numbers. And River Maritima is very, very loosely rooted in all these substrates. And so as flamingos go across them more and more and more, the ability for them for seagrasses to grow overall is definitely decreased. And the thought being that if enough flamingos are in one basin at one time, that basin, even if you transplant it every year, may not ever recover on its own. And so that's a possible tipping point. Two, as these basins, as they warm up, since not every basin is being used for salt production, they're not all regulated for water. In an environmental sense, they're regulated for water for salt production. And so the water area gets smaller, and flamingos then gather together more. And so the degradation in that area in deeper water is also much higher. And then too, with the transparency of the water going way down with them stirring up soils, it also impacts River Maritima growth as well. And then last, for spatial heterogeneity, the lake itself is huge. And parts of the lake are still used, some are not used for salt production. And all these basins have different water levels, salinities, temperatures, depths. And so it really creates a kind of a patchwork of possible areas for work. And as we go, there's no way that work can be done there because it's always used for this area is always used for salt production. And so it creates a very diverse lake, even though the parameters are very, very slim. Future recommendations. So for seagrasses, needed monitoring, and evaluation of basins is always key to understand if we're still doing what we want to be doing. Figuring out, is that sod method going to work, and is that the best method to use? So far, we think it is, and that has the same results. But until we monitor year after year, we won't know how that really happens long term. Further research into creating mixed seagrass meadows. So we only transplant one species of seagrass right now, but we did work into looking into other seagrasses that would also work in that area. And creating mixed seagrass meadows not only increases resiliency and diversity, but it means that if there's a big drought event or temperatures go way up or salinity changes, you're not going to lose an entire basin of seagrasses. You're going to have other species that can still survive in those different parameters. Documenting water chemistry over time, we talked about. And then something that we noticed it's very difficult is having the public understand why seagrasses matter. And really any work matters in Bulgaria. Due to the way culturally, we'll get into later, people in Bulgaria just sort of view the world. If it's not their property, it's not their problem. And so their gardens were immaculate, their houses were immaculate, but the street wasn't because it was public. And if it was public, the government should be taking care of it, and they aren't. And so to have people understand that this is a really important piece that we should be valuing and looking towards and like doing work towards is key. And so I did a lot of work to kind of help provide some context to how do you communicate these findings, not only for climate change, but of course you guys and how you can sell them to the public. Basically, be like, here's what Seagrass give you, for, they give you oxygen, they give you carbon storage, they give, they provide habitat, all the communications pieces.
All right, so for the Greater Flamingo, in order to continuing to look into the effects of the flamingos in the area, we recommend the 3 following actions. For the first one, our project was largely based on quantitative numerical data, so like population size or coordinates, but we believe it would be important to, in addition to that, also look at observational data, observing the species in those basins, seeing how they interact with each other in order to have a greater understanding of it. And this will be especially important in that basin that we identified to have both high numbers of avocets and flamingos, since we know there's a lot of intersect going on in there. For the second one, our project also focused on the effects the flamingos had to other bird species, but it would also be beneficial to consider the system as a whole and see how they affect the prey species. With so many of them, is there overexploitation of food resources, especially those that are shared with the other bird species? Doing so will also help to identify the exact species that avocets and flamingos are eating in this region, instead of relying on literature from other regions that have a different array of prey available. And that'll further help to determine how much, to compare basically the diet of them to see if there's a lot of similarities or differences. The third one, as I mentioned before, within that shared basin, it appeared that the avocets and flamingos were occupying different topographical regions, but as of right now, there's not data on the depth gradients of each basin. So we can recommend looking into that, both spatially, across all the different basins, but also temporally, how do, even just within one basin, how does it change from one season to another or 1 year from another? And looking into this will help to see if it actually is playing a role in the possible competition. Are they actually keeping to different regions of the basins, or is it just happenstance in this situation?
Thank you, Abby and Parker, for all the great information you provided. And now I'm going to do a little run through of our deliverables. And our first one, as I mentioned earlier, is that we created 2 scientific posters. So here's a little preview of the first, being transplantation of the seagrass Rubia maritima for coastal wetland conservation in the Black Sea region. And then here is our second scientific poster on the Atanasoska Lake, possible competition between the increasing populations of greater flamingos and local waterbird communities. And so we created these specifically for BBF, which was utilized recently, 2 weeks ago, I think now, in their 2022 live platform meeting. And this was a poster session, and luckily we were able to create an audio recording since we unfortunately weren't able to be there in person. But we were able to participate in this meeting that focused in on innovative approaches to wetland management. And so that was really nice for us to be able to participate and kind of show all the work that Abby and Parker just went through with you. Ignore that in the presentation earlier. And so now is our second deliverable, which is the story map. And so we found that this would be a really useful and important communication tool for not only us, but for BBF as well, because communication and raising that awareness, whether that be in conservation problems, climate change issues going on in the world, but just in general to kind of show the entirety of what our internship encompassed over the summer. So this is about 1:35 video. And so you'll see a little introduction of who we are, where we come from, and how we got involved with BBF. Sorry, awkward silence. And then we'll have the introduction with BBF, of course, their mission statement, some hyperlinks with some projects, and an interactive map of where we worked at. And then we have our little section on our research topics, which is the greater flamingos and Rupia maritima. And then that's going to lead into our deliverables, which is what I'm going over with you all right now. We're almost there. And now we have our in the field activities. So we did more than that, such as the collection of Salicornia. We did the transplantation of Rupia maritima. And then coming up, we have our Lestis macrostigma dragonfly monitoring. So just a bunch of other experiences that we were able to participate in, which I know we were really excited for. And then the other was a bird monitoring activity that we did with an ornithologist out there. And then we end on a nice note with a little slideshow of some photos of our cultural experiences, as well as some activities that we were able to participate in. And then this is just a little goodbye note that we did to the organization. And overall, we can post a link to this so you guys can look at it in more detail and go through those little slideshows. But that was our story map, and we really hope that it'll be a useful tool for EBF. And so now moving on to our technical reports for the seagrass, as well as the greater flamingo. So these were created specifically for internal use for BBF, based on all of the research findings that we were able to find this summer. So I want to say between the three of us, we easily read over 50 pages. And you can imagine the amount of research that was found and collected within those reports. And so this specific technical report embodies all of the research that we were able to find. And so you'll see in the table of contents for the seagrass that we have everything we went through and kind of talked about today, but we have another level deeper, such as looking into physical threats and climatic threats, or we have new sections that talk about seagrass species comparison. So we have, I believe, like 10 different seagrass species that we looked into aside from Rupia maritima. So just taking the research another level further for the organization. And then just an example for the table of contents for the flamingos, we look greater into diet comparisons of all three bird species. We looked into climatic, anthropogenic, and natural threats for greater flamingos. So as I said, it was just all information that didn't necessarily need to be in this presentation, but very pertinent to the technical report and for the organization. And so now we have our individual reflections, and I shall start. So for me, I found that this was a really good experience. I personally was not able to do an international experience abroad in undergrad. And so being able to kind of like open myself up to a new country that I never had been to, and working with two amazing teammates and building that deeper connection, as well as just being able to work with a conservation organization, something that I never saw that I would be doing when I was younger. And I think just the overall experience of gaining field work, something I never had. I didn't have that in my toolkit. So being able to add these new skills and moving forward is something that I really am looking forward to kind of like expressing to future employers to say, I did this, and I'm really proud of the connections and experience I had.
For me, this project provided so many opportunities to gain experience, both in my professional life and personal life. I mean, just being able to work on a real world tangible project gave me a glimpse into what kind of work I can do in the future, what kind of things I liked. I'm really proud of what we were able to accomplish and produce. And like we've kind of discussed throughout this, I got to try a lot of new things, found new skills that I really enjoyed, like data analysis I got really into. So it was really great to gain those professional experiences, but also just being in an international setting, it just really heightens those experiences, because not only am I doing new things at work, but I'm also doing it in my daily life, you know, new environments and culture and society. So it really put me outside my comfort zone, but in a good way, where I was able to gain more confidence in myself and my capabilities.
I'll echo what they both said. Being able to go abroad and do work is awesome. Luckily enough, it worked out. My roommate Chase was in Romania, and so being able to be in a part of the world with somebody who I also knew, was able to hang out with and see. We have friends all across Europe, and so being able to be in a spot where I could do really good work, and also see a lot of my friends and experience that area with them and explore was great. And BBF really opened their hearts to us and kind of say, what do you want to do? And working for an international organization period is huge. Working so closely with them was even better, because I was able to really see like how that works on a large scale. Like the work is slow, and that's okay, but they really do have this like internal, very driven attitude to get things done that I think is sometimes hard to see in a big organization working for them, even here in the United States. And going abroad, it was just even more highlighted.
And so now moving on to our cultural experience, we had many experiences, some that we'll go over with you today. And for me, I'm going to talk to you about our banitsa making experience that we did at Radistina's home. So what this is a traditional pastry dish, and it includes eggs, yogurt, local cheese called serene, as well as a little bit of butter, and we're using phyllo paste. And so we're basically going to layer that in a dish, and we end up baking it. And this specific dish, banitsa, can be found in a lot of their markets. And so it's really nice to be able to have that experience with each other with BBF. And we're really thankful to have been able to do that. And then another part was just the food in general. I can vouch that everything was insanely fresh. All fruits and vegetables are locally grown. There was a man who came from Turkey. He would leave on and off, and he would bring his produce from Turkey. And it's just nice to know that all your food is being locally grown and it's extremely fresh. And just in general, with all of the traditional dishes, there was one called tartor. It was a cucumber soup. I was not a fan, but they enjoyed it. But it was still overall nice to try new dishes that I don't think that I would have ever had here in America. And just overall, because we were along the sea, the seafood was insane. I was able to try a bunch of different fishes that I never had consumed here. And just overall, the presentation and food in general was amazing and delicious. I wish you all could have tried it.
Another experience we had lots of experiences with transportation. We had to kind of figure out how to get around, so we decided not to rent a car when we're there. Thankfully, Burgas has a very well-established bus system, lots of buses that go everywhere. It was really easy to figure out, and they even have like apps that you can use that tell you exactly what buses to get on and everything. But just having to take a bus in general, just to do things like grocery shopping and having to lug all of that back on the bus and try to get around was a new experience. And I think it kind of helped us learn to think about how we're getting somewhere rather than just automatically relying on a car like we do here. We also had fun little experiences with trying to get around with taxis. Probably definitely got overcharged just because we didn't know better in the language barrier and everything. Or we had an experience traveling between cities, having to take multiple trains with really no English guidance at all. So it was kind of like just going with the flow, trying to figure out how to get to where we need to go. Another experience was actually with a Turkish tradition or folk medicine that's also largely practiced in Bulgaria. It consists of a lead bullet that's melted down, and then it's poured into like really cold water, and it hardens to form some kind of shape. And then that shape is then read to reveal like different experiences or feelings that are weighing you down. And you do a few rounds of that. At the end, you get to take your shape back home with you. You put it under your pillow, sleep for 3 nights on it, and then afterwards you just like toss it into the sea to release those negative energies. And the ability to read these shapes is passed down through generations, and it's only certain women that are able to perform the ceremony.
Also on cultural experiences, I think that, as Americans in a foreign country, it's always going to be hard. First day out, I went to go grocery store, I got yelled at by the lady checking me out in Bulgarian, and I was just like, I don't know what to tell you. And that's a very sobering moment because you realize I'm the biggest idiot and also the smartest guy in the room for myself. And so that was big for me. Like living alone in a foreign country is obviously a very steep learning curve. And that was huge to be like, oh, I can do that not only, but I also can find friends, and when we did find friends, Sanko, who worked with BBF, introduced me and us to all of his friends, and they took us around and took me around to places that I would never have found on my own, and really like helped out a very lonely American who was trying to find friends and want someone to go have a beer with or like just hang out with. And so I'm very grateful for that because we were told Bulgaria is they're very reserved. And I was told by Sanko, you're lucky, I'm happy we found you. I'm glad you found us because you probably wouldn't have found anybody else like us. They weren't being like, we're really cool, but they're saying like, it's hard to find people who want to hang out with Americans here for a long period of time because they're just very reserved. And so I got very, very lucky to have experiences like that. And I'll say Bulgarians are very much like American in the sense of how prideful they are for their history and their country. Svetomir, one of my good friends, would always go on a long tangent about something Bulgarian that he just loved. And it was awesome to feel like we're connected in that way, about how much you care about where we're from. And also their language. The language is completely different letters entirely. It's the base language for the entire Cyrillic alphabet. So Russian's based off Bulgarian, and they're very proud of that fact. And so in trying to get around on buses, I would write down the Bulgarian, name of the street and then the English pronunciation to be able to listen for it, because it was like being back in kindergarten trying to read road signs. You're like sounding out this thing letter by letter, and you get there and you're like, I don't even know what it said. Like I can't even understand what it said. But it was still a great time, and I think the people there really do love what they do. And though they are behind in some ways, they also are very forward-thinking in other ways, and they have a really good connection to the natural world. Maritima, which happens in the beginning of March, revolves around you either buy or you make these little red bracelets, and you pass them around to your friends. And when you see a stork fly by, you tie that bracelet onto a tree or onto a rock, and it kind of signifies the beginning of spring and summer. And so they really have these very, very traditional values rooted deeply in nature that aren't really found here in the United States. Because they've been around for so long, they have the ability to have to pass down over hundreds of years, thousands of years. And some of that stuff is folklore from Turkey or Greece or Romania, and some of it comes from the Thracian beliefs. And so it's kind of a really encompassing melting pot of culture in Eastern Europe.
So we just wanted to share some photos with you guys from our experience. So with this one, the big statue on the left was from the founders of the Bulgarian state monuments. That's when we had the fun little train adventure to get there to Shumen, which is northwest of Burgas. And it's located at the top of a mountain, and you can either drive and park there, or you can do what we did and just walk these endless stairs straight up into the mountain, and you get to the top, you're completely dead, but it's so worth it because it was really beautiful getting to see all of their statues and artwork, and it was just stunning. The one on the top right is from the Rhodope Mountains. Soon after we got to Bulgaria, BBF was having a work trip, I guess, where they can work things out in kind of an enclosed setting and all get together. So they did it here. And it was very remote, like you have to either take a boat or hike to get to these cabins. And they're very big on sustainable living. So it's really interesting to get to see how they do things up there and how they live, and even just to experience a different region of Bulgaria that was different from where we were at. And then the bottom right one is a little black-winged stilt. We were doing some field work and it just kept circling around, screaming at us nonstop. So I had to get a little picture of it because they're very goofy little birds.
And for some of these photos, the top left is Alestis macrostigma couple. And that was a photo I took while we were doing our dragonfly monitoring activity with Stanimira in Pomoria, which is a different lagoon that we were in. And then the top right photo is just of a random street cat. If you were there, there were thousands of cats everywhere. I'm allergic to cats. I don't like cats. And they were everywhere. But Abby loved cats, so I would feed them. Nice. Plenty of cats everywhere throughout the city of Burgas. And then the bottom left photo is a Soviet era infrastructure style apartment. And so these apartments, I want to say, are maybe 15 plus stories, but they're homes to the Bulgarians that live there. So we may see them just as an apartment, but those are their forever homes that they may stay in. And so although it looks more Soviet era on the outside, it is fitted to that individual on the inside. So with our apartment, ours was very modern in the inside, but with Parker's apartment, it was fairly modern.
Yeah, it was very modern.
Never mind, I take it back. It was pretty modern, but that was just the style of most of the infrastructure while we were there in Bulgaria. And then the bottom right photo was of the beach side, which was a walk. It was on a walk that we took when going to BBF's educational center. So this was the lovely view that we were able to either bike or walk on that very long path down to the center. And then the first photo is of Salicornia europaea, and that was part of one of our field experiences of what we collected. And then the second photo is of flamingos, and that was taken at BBF's bird watching center called The Hide. And then the third photo was is a pink salt basin, which is located behind their educational center. And just a fun little activity more north down from there is a tourist area where you can actually go and bathe in these pink basins. And it was very relaxing, very salty on the eyes and body, but it was relaxing no more the less. And now we have concluded our presentation, and Greg, you're ready to clap. You can go ahead and clap.